right. Hello, everyone. This is Dominic. Thank you for watching the Comic Book Report. And thank you to everyone at Dynamite for going ahead and getting this all set up for us. We have today the great Greg Weisman, and we just are so thankful that he's able to join us. Thank you so much for making time today.
Happy to do it. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I won't bury the lead. I think I'll just kind of jump in on some of the stuff that we were kind of set up to talk about first, and then we'll go from there if that's okay with you.
Sure.
The big thing I want to make sure we talk about today is the Gargoyles Winter Special from Dynamite, and then a little bit about Gargoyle Quest issue 5, which just came out in comic shops, I believe, last week. So first, let's go ahead and talk about the Winter Special. I know you've been writing these Gargoyle comics for a while now. What sets apart the Winter Special?
Well, the Winter Special, which I co-wrote with my regular editor, Dynamite Nate Cosby, is a word-free. I mean, there's some sound effects, but no dialogue. Sort of interlude for Bronx on the first day of snow in Manhattan.
Wow.
1997, and it's really a little Bronx adventure. It's a really nice holiday story, sort of heartwarming story for the holidays, featuring Bronx. Nate pitched the idea to me. I thought it was great, and so we co-plotted it, and he did the script, and I gave feedback, and I think, and we got Nate got George Campedeas back, who did the first 12 issues of Gargoyles for Dynamite.
Yeah.
So fantastic. So George has done a fantastic job telling this Bronx story for our Winter Special.
Very, very cool. Well, I'm excited to hear that. I actually got a little bit of an early look at that from Dynamite, which was awesome. It was really cool to see George back on art.
Mm-hmm.
I know I had the opportunity to read the first handful of issues of the Here in Manhattan, like the relaunch you guys did at Gargoyles, like, I don't know, a couple years back now. But really cool stuff. I'm really excited about that. So definitely, if you've been paying attention to Gargoyles, everyone, definitely grab the Winter Special. I'm really fascinated by the idea of a dialogue-free comic. I've read a couple of those throughout the years. I feel like that presents sometimes unique challenges. As far as I know, you co-wrote it with Nate, but what was your approach for helping co-plot something that was completely without dialogue? Had you ever done that before in any medium or anything?
I've done silent sequences before, certainly on television, and long silent sequences in comics, but I don't think I've ever done an issue completely without dialogue. And it was sort of like Nate's idea, let's do this where it's just Bronx and no dialogue, but he had it sort of bookended with the Gargoyles talking. And I said, look, if we're going to do this, let's do it. We don't need, let's get all the dialogue out. No, again, we've got sound effects in there, obviously, but and those include Bronx's howls and grunts and stuff like that. But let's just take all the words out, and we don't need to hear Goliath chatting at the beginning or at the end in order to get what's going on here. So, and Nate was very enthusiastic about that. So we just decided, if we're going to do it, let's go for it. Let's really do it. And then again, Nate scripted it, and it came through. And George's art tells the story. You don't need a narrator sort of saying, and then Bronx jumped up here.
Yeah.
You see Bronx jumped up there. So, and Bronx doesn't talk, so he's not going to be sitting there going, well, I think I'm going to jump up here.
Sure.
So it winds up being fairly elegant, I think. And again, it's a pretty warm, fuzzy story for the holidays. This is not a big, dark Gargoyles epic. This is a sweet little story, perfect for a stocking stuffer or something. Even if you've never seen Gargoyles before in comic or animation, I think you'd find this to be a fun little story.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that art is absolutely gorgeous. And who doesn't like a winter one-shot, like you're saying? I think that's perfect. Pivoting slightly to the Gargoyle Quest issue 5, I think that just came out recently. Without going too spoiler heavy, is there anything you can speak to about that? Like, did that wrap up an arc recently, or I haven't made my way to the Quest series yet. So what can you
Well,
tell
then
us
you're
about that?
missing out.
I know, I'm behind.
I might be biased though. So Gargoyles Quest number 5 is the final issue of the 5-issue miniseries, where Demona gathered the 3 keys of power, of mystic power, to change the world and screw over the human race. And so it's the culmination of both this 5-issue miniseries, but also of the machinations that Demona set in motion back in the regular title, back in Gargoyles number 7. So,
Right.
excuse me. So it's the culmination of a year and a half's worth of storytelling. And I think again, I'm biased. I wrote the damn thing, but
Sure.
I think it's a pretty cool ending to this big story we've had, and it is big. It's a big sort of potentially global event that the Gargoyles have to work together to thwart, so that Demona doesn't wind up enslaving the entire human race.
Man. Wow. Well, that sounds pretty intense. It sounds like this is the epic. We had the one shot, which was this heartwarming tale, but this sounds like the true epic here. So that's awesome. That just came out and that wraps it up for this storyline.
Right.
Great. Well, I'm happy we were able to talk about that. For all of you Gargoyles lovers, definitely look out for that one shot, the winter special, and then definitely pick up Gargoyles Quest. I know I need to catch up.
So the Gargoyles Quest number 5 came out on December 4th, so it's out now. And the Gargoyles Winter Special comes out December 18th, so less than a week from now.
And perfect stocking stuffer, like you said. It's perfect timing.
Yep.
If I can ask, so I was kind of blown away at having an opportunity to speak to you, just because I know that you co-created the Gargoyles show as well, the animated series back in the day. I'm a child of the 90s myself, so Gargoyles was kind of like a background fixture in a lot of the culture. I feel like seeing Goliath on top of the buildings and everyone doing their thing. So I'd love to talk to you a little bit about, like, going back a little ways.
Sure.
How did this first present itself? How did you first get attached to, or how did you help develop the initial kernel of the idea? Did you help develop
I was there
it?
from day one. It's been my baby for 30 years now.
Wow.
More than that, because we started developing it in 1991. So it's been 33 years. 30 years since the show went on the air, but 33 years since we first started working on it. Someone at the office, was talking about the Gremlins movies and how we needed. I was director of series development at Walt Disney TV Animation at the time, and saying that we needed something along those lines. And I'd always been fascinated with Gargoyles, going back to high school. I used to take photographs of Gargoyles, collect postcards with Gargoyles on them. It's not like I was sitting there in high school going, I'm going to someday do an animated series based on these stone.
Sure.
But I just thought they were cool. And so I suggested that. We started out developing it as a comedy adventure series, very much in the mode of Disney's Adventures of the Gummy Bears.
Sure. Oh, wow.
Great show created by Jim Magon.
Yeah.
And was a big influence on the early development of Gargoyles. Gummy Bears had this great sort of medieval backstory, but this was the 90s now. That show had been developed in the 80s, and this was the 90s. So, and the sort of buzzword in the 90s was edgy. Everything had to be edgy. Even a kids' comedy had to be edgy. We did two things. One is we'd have this medieval backstory, but instead of setting it in this sort of pastoral, bucolic medieval time, we'd set it in the present, which was at the time 1994, of Manhattan, the most modern city in the world. And so the idea was that would be edgier, and then instead of it being about cute, multicolored little bears, cuddly bears that bounced around, we make it be about
a little
multicolored little monsters who flew around, and that seemed edgier to us too. And so we developed a TV show that I think would have made a great show, not the show that you guys saw,
Right.
but a great show that was a comedy adventure show about all these cute little gargoyles. We had a spell cast on them and wake up in 20th century Manhattan after sleeping for 1,000 years, and have their adventures and go a little bonkers and that kind of thing. And and in those days, I would, every 6 months or so, I would go up in front of Michael Eisner, who was at the time the chairman of the Walt Disney Company, and I would pitch him a bunch of shows, somewhere between 6 to 10 shows every time. And he'd always pick something, but we were hoping he'd pick Gargoyles, and he didn't. He didn't like it.
Yeah.
But my immediate boss, a guy named Gary Kreisel, did like it. And he said, there's something here, so I want you to work on it some more. So I showed the pitch to a few people around the office to get feedback. One of the people I showed it to was a guy named Tad Stones, who created Darkwing Duck.
Yeah.
And Chippendales Rescue Rangers and a lot of great stuff for the company. And Tad had, it wasn't out yet, but Tad at the time had seen an early animatic for Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
So he had that in the back of his head, and he said, well, you've got all these little gargoyles. What if instead of the little gargoyles, you had one big gargoyle?
Yeah.
And that really clicked for me. My background wasn't funny animals and cute little things. My background was superheroes. I'd worked at DC Comics for years. And, so we decided to try to make it a superhero show that just didn't flag itself as a superhero show. No capes, no tights, nothing like that. And artist named Greg Guler and I created the character of Goliath. And then we took the comedy show and put it through the prism of Goliath, came out the other end with the show that you all saw on television, this action drama, still with some humor in it, with romance, all sorts of things. Fantasy, sci-fi, Shakespeare, everything. Yeah. We came up with all that after we came up with Goliath. And so we pitched this show to Eisner, and Eisner didn't like it. And he passed on it. But Jeffrey Katzenberg thought we should continue to work on it, and my boss thought so too. So I took a careful look at it, and I said, well, okay, we've changed the show once already. How should we change it again? And I looked at it closely, and I said, we shouldn't change the show. There's nothing wrong with the show. The problem is the pitch. We had all these ideas for the pack and for mutates and for all this stuff, and we put it all in this pitch. It was all good stuff. It was all stuff that we ended up doing in the show, but it made the pitch confusing and diffuse. And so we cut the pitch way down. We didn't add anything. We reordered a few things, but we mostly just cut it way down so that it really focused, for the most part, on the relationship between Goliath, the main gargoyle, and Elisa, the human police detective who befriends them. And so it felt much more like a Beauty and the Beast tale. And by that time, Beauty and the Beast had come out, and as you may know, did fairly well for the company.
Yeah, just a little.
So we went and pitched to Michael a third time, a full year after the first pitch and 6 months after the second pitch. We pitched it a third time, and this time he bought it, and we were off to the races. That's how we got it sold.
That's incredible. And I really appreciate you. I'm sure you've had to reiterate this story a few times, but I'm like totally spellbound just listening to you. That like blows my mind. And even the people you like, your bosses or the people you're rubbing shoulders with, these are like name dropping just some like pretty heavy hitters. And that's incredible. And it makes sense when you see how successful Gargoyles was throughout the 90s. I don't know like what the ratings were, but as just like someone who
the ratings for the first season were a grand slam home run. We did fantastic. We were a weekly show. We were on once a week, and we absolutely were huge. We had toys come out from Kenner. Yep. And those were the #1 boys toy in the world for 1 year. Yeah. And then the second year, they had us go 5 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
And we were still a hit, but I'd say instead of being a grand slam home run, we were more like a single or double. And there were two big reasons for that. Probably the main reason was that our second season was the first season of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And
Oh,
that
wow.
was a phenomenon. I mean, just
Yep.
a huge phenomenon. And so we went head to head with them in almost every market.
Wow.
And we were always second place to them.
Yep.
We were never in third place. No one else beat us.
Yeah.
But we were never in first place again either. We lost to Power Rangers every single day. And even if we had a new episode and they had reruns, we were still losing to them.
Yeah.
I'd love to say different. I'd love to be able to say, well, we beat them sometimes, but
Sure.
the truth is we never did. No one ever beat us except them, but they beat us day in, day out. And that was a bummer. And then the second problem we had was that, it was a syndicated show, so it's in different stations and different markets.
Sure.
It was going on at the same time as the O.J. Simpson trial, which some of your viewers may be old enough to recall was a big deal back then. And so we were constantly being preempted for trial coverage.
Oh, wow.
And for a show like ours, where there's so much continuity and so much, that carries through from episode to episode, being preempted was not just once, but regularly was kind of devastating and didn't help our ratings either. So we did well enough in season 2, but by that time, we just weren't knocking it out of the park anymore. And so we, came to an end at season 2. They ended up doing a third season without either me or most of the creative staff on the show.
Wow.
For ABC Saturday morning, and they called that the Goliath Chronicles.
Yeah.
And it didn't do that well, but they also changed a lot of what made the show what it was. So I think some real talented people worked on it, to be clear, but they had a killer schedule, worse than ours, and ours had been brutal.
Yeah.
And they just didn't have time to even really get super familiar with the show. So what they were doing didn't work for new audiences.
Sure.
It didn't keep the old audience because it was just not quite on target. And,
sure. Man.
But that was, our story in the 90s.
And it's fascinating because I don't even know if I was aware that you only had like 2 seasons before it went over to Goliath Chronicles, just because when I remember Gargoyles, I remember those early seasons, and I just feel like that was so in the zeitgeist for throughout the 90s with syndication and stuff. I mean, you guys really left an impact, clearly. I mean, if you're still able to play in that sandbox now, 30 years on with this comics, it's just wild.
The show holds up really well. I mean, it's on Disney Plus now, so if folks out there haven't seen it, I still recommend it. It's set in the 90s. You can tell that because no one has a cell phone, and the few people who do have a cell phone, they're the size of a brick.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think it plays modern, but it's set in the 90s, and that's what we've done with the comics. Is our comics are set. The show started in 94, ended in 96, and our comics are set in 97. So it follows right on the heels of what the show was. We did 13 episodes in the first season of Gargoyles, and then 52 episodes in the second season of Gargoyles. There's 55 episodes in those first 2 seasons, and that doesn't even count the 13 they did for Goliath Chronicles without me. But and then in the 2000s, I did some comics for SLG of Gargoyles, which the fans and I consider to be the true third season. We did 12 issues of Gargoyles and 6 issues of a spinoff called Gargoyles Bad Guys. And I think of those 18 issues as season 3. And then the Dynamite stuff I think of as season 4, set in 1997. So the 12 issues of Gargoyles. We had a 6-issue prequel miniseries called Gargoyles Dark Ages. We did a Halloween special last year and a winter special this year, and Gargoyles Quest this year. And those books are what I think of as the 4th season. And now we're looking ahead. They've announced Demona Zero is coming out for Free Comic Book Day. And that'll be followed by Demona miniseries and other stuff. We have a lot of plans in the works for 2025 and forward, because the book's selling well for Dynamite, thank God, and or knock wood or whatever. But so we hope fans will continue to support it. Well,
I love to hear that. I love to hear that it's doing well. And I think it makes sense, because you have people like myself who grew up with Gargoyles who now, you know, for the most cases, have some comic book money and are ready to play back in the world. And the fact that they were able to get, you know, one of the series creators like involved, and like you said, like it feels like an extension of what you guys already created all the way back in the 90s, you know, and I love that. I think that that's so cool. I did want to touch base, kind of pivoting off Gargoyles for a minute, because I can honestly spend the whole time talking about Gargoyles, and I can't promise we won't go back to it. But you mentioned, like earlier in the interview, you mentioned that at one point you had history with DC Comics. And so I was just wondering, how did you get into these industries in the first place, whether it was comics or even like the television stuff? Like what kind of got you on that path, if you don't mind me asking?
No, I don't. So when I was 19, I was a comic book fan in college, and these were in the days, you know, the geeks hadn't inherited the earth yet. I mean, this is a long time ago, 1983. Sure. So it's not like I knew a ton of comic book fans. I didn't. There was one other guy at my college who collected comics, as far as I knew. So in those days, it was Thursday, it was comic book day. So every Thursday, he and I would, I had a car and he didn't. So we'd drive over to the comic book store and buy a bunch of comics. And I was really interested in writing for comics, but I had no idea how to break in. And suddenly we go one week, and in every Marvel book across the board, they announced this search for new talent, writers and artists and everything. And I thought, wow, this is great, but wow, they're just going to get inundated with submissions. I mean, they'll just get flooded. I feel like anything I write will just get lost in the shuffle. And I made one sort of smart decision, which is I thought, if Marvel announces a new talent hunt, then I bet you anything DC will announce one soon.
Right.
And so instead of working, Nate's backstage, by the way.
Let's go ahead. Do you mind if I pause it to invite Nate in really quick?
Yeah, sure.
Right here. Awesome. Hello. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Purple.
Hello. Would you mind introducing yourself real quick?
Yeah, I don't want to. No, I'm Nate Cosby. Hi, I'm the editor of Greg on all his Gargoyles books the past few years, and I'm the co-writer of the Gargoyles Winter Special.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Nate. And see, I told you we were going to get back to Gargoyles, but I want to go back to Greg.
I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. Greg is the bell cow. He is the A-lister. I did not realize that you guys needed like the C level, the C team coming in to help out. That's all I am. Yeah.
Oh no, I am so grateful to have you both. You are both so welcome. I'm really humbled you guys are able to make time to be on the channel. But Greg, if you don't mind just finishing the anecdote real quick, and then I want to get back to talking to Nate for a second as well. But Greg was just mentioning how he kind of got involved in the comic book industry.
So I thought DC would announce a new talent search, and so instead of prepping Marvel materials, Marvel stories based on Marvel characters, I prepped stories based on DC characters. And
wow,
sure enough, literally the next month in all of DC's books, they announced a new talent hunt, And so I was ready, and I had all these stories and scripts, and I sent them to DC. And years later, I found the logbook where they logged in all the submissions for the new talent search. And I was literally the second person there, and they had written my name and my address there. And there was only one person ahead of me whose address was local for Manhattan. So I thought, okay, so that guy probably just ran his stuff over. And mine had to be mailed across the country by old-fashioned regular mail. But otherwise, I was the second person on the list. But you know how file folders work, where,
Sure,
you know, if you happen to accidentally slip something between two files,
it
sort
goes
of
straight
slides to the bottom.
Oh
and you
no!
can't see it anymore.
Yeah.
So that's what happened to my submission. Like, they logged it in and then they put it in the file cabinet, but it slid down between two file folders. And so again, years later, when I found that logbook, I was emptying out. I was on staff at DC.
Sure.
Emptying out this file cabinet, which no one had used for years. And I found my submission on the bottom of the drawer. But what happened is, you know, they had my address, and they knew I had sent something in, and they couldn't find it.
Yeah.
And at the time, they had two packets that they prepared, one for writers and one for artists. And about 70% of the submissions were for artists, and only 30% were for writers. So they guessed that I was an artist and sent me the pack for artists. And I was 19 years old, and I was furious in a way that only a 19-year-old can be furious and outraged. And I wrote a letter to Dick Giordano.
Whoa, okay.
Executive editor of DC Comics at the time. He's a great guy. I loved Dick. Passed away some years ago, but I loved him. But I wrote this letter saying that I was a professional, which was a lie. I'd never done anything before in my life. And of course, I kept copies of my work. If they couldn't find my work, that was fine. Mistakes happen. Just write to me and say they need copies, and I would have sent copies. And I wrote this. I typed this letter up on an old-fashioned typewriter, and I put it in an envelope, and I put a stamp on it, and I stuck it in the U.S. mail. And within seconds of doing this, I thought, "Oh my God, what have I done?
Yeah,
I'll never work in this business again." So I told my friend Doug about it. Again, my one other comic book reading friend in college, and Doug just laughed at me. And then a few days after that, I'm in my dorm room, and we get a call on what people now call a landline, but back then we just called it the phone. And my roommate, who was not into comics at all, he picked it up and he said, "There's a guy named Dick Giordano who wants to talk to you." And I thought, this is Doug. This is Doug.
Yeah.
So I get on the phone and I go, "So this is Dick Giordano."
Oh boy.
And immediately this voice, which I know instantly is not Doug, goes, "Yes, this is Dick Giordano." And I realized within a second that I'm actually talking to Dick, because no one else I knew who Dick Giordano was.
Yeah.
And so he says to me, "I liked your letter. You had some good points there. Are you going to be in New York anytime soon?" And I went to school in California, and I said, "Yeah, in fact, I'm going to be there in March." So I made an appointment with his assistant to come in and see him and talk to him. And then after I got off the phone, I had to figure out how I was going to get to New York in March, which was my spring break. That was the good news. I mean, I had the foresight to know I'd be free, but I wound up, my dad gave me miles, and I had a cousin who lived in New York, and I crashed on her couch.
Yeah.
And it's a longer story, but basically I met with Dick on a very rainy St. Patrick's Day at 666 Fifth Avenue, which is a sort of ominous address, but that's where DC Comics was at the time.
Wow.
And I wound up getting a few writing assignments, and ultimately, after I graduated college, starting there as an assistant. Well, I started as an editorial assistant, then worked my way up to assistant editor and associate editor before I moved back to California.
That's incredible. I love the origin story, especially with the letter and then the call. Like, man, like, what were you thinking when he called out the letter? Were you just like, oh boy, he found me? Or were you excited? Was that nerves or what?
I mean, I had convinced myself that the letter was the dumbest thing I'd ever done. So when he said he liked it, I was just kind of stunned. I mean, I don't think I said anything intelligent throughout that whole call, other than saying, yeah, I'll be there in March, as if I already had a plan when I didn't at all. But and I think ultimately Dick saw through me. Like, I don't think I fooled him at all, but for whatever reason, he liked me, and he was a great mentor to me for years. And you know, he was a terrific guy, and that's how I got in.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Sure. I would like to pivot to Nate real quick. Thank you so much for joining us. Earlier in the conversation, Greg was just kind of sharing a little bit about the Gargoyle Winter Special that's coming out through Dynamite. And he mentioned that you kind of came with the idea. I'd love to hear, if you don't mind sharing, where did the idea come from? How did you kind of land on this winter special?
Well, I was working at DC and I found this pamphlet by Greg Weisman, and I thought, no. And I thought, this is some of the worst art I've ever seen. This guy can't draw at all. I'm going to tell you right now. No, honestly, it's been one of the great thrills of my professional life to work with Greg on Gargoyles. I loved it growing up and love it to this day. And when I was initially given the opportunity to help him develop a new series and multiple series, it's just been so creatively fulfilling and awesome. And so after a couple of years, I had no motivation to be like, I want, like, oh, let me tell my story, my version of Gargoyles. It was nothing like that. But I've been very clear from the jump. It's like, Bronx is my guy. Like, Bronx.
He was very clear about that.
Yeah.
Super duper clear. Yeah. So when, George Combadais was the initial artist of the new Gargoyle series, and he was doing the new designs, and it was like, don't forget Bronx. In fact, do Bronx first. You can get to Goliath in a second, but let's make sure we nail Bronx. He's been like my Twitter avatar, my Blue Sky avatar, all that kind of stuff. I love him. And so there was an opportunity for, we've done a few special one-shot kind of things. We did a Halloween special that Greg wrote last year, I believe. And so when it became clear that it was time to do a winter special, for some reason, just this idea crystallized in my mind of watching Bronx just kind of jumping through the snow, just like white, just like a fully white New York City with a blue gargoyle monster jumping around and playing. And so I just went to Greg and asked, like, hey, just say no, please say no. I gave him like 8 outs, just like, I want you actively. So I'm coming in with the assumption of no, but I have this idea, and if you want to work on it together, I would love to, or you can have it yourself. And he was incredibly gracious and kind and like let me pitch, and then he gave like some of the best notes I've ever received in my limited experience as a writer, and it made the story so much richer and better. It's like he's a good writer or something, and yeah, it was just a real delight to be able to put this together. I knew from the start, and I knew it was going to be a series of conversations of, like, I didn't want there to be any dialogue. I wanted, because Bronx doesn't talk, and Bronx was going to encounter other characters that do not talk. And so, there was talk about an omniscient narrator, there was talk about a supporting character kind of stuff, but it's like, I just felt really confident that we could tell the story without any words, just sound effects and visuals, and knowing that George Combadais was going to come back and draw this was just a real treat. And I had full confidence that his storytelling abilities would help, but be able to be front and center. And, it's the best way to write, by putting Greg's names first, have George do all the storytelling, and I'm just in the middle, just like, yeah, you guys are doing great.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think it's a really awesome idea. I love the idea of it. What a
Thank you.
beloved character, and how cool to play in this sandbox. How cool to play in this world. And if you don't mind me asking, if I would love to know. I know you said you've been editing as well on the Gargoyles stuff. How did you first get involved in the comic book industry?
Well, I was an intern at Marvel. Almost got hired, and then didn't get hired, and then went back to college, and then went back to be an intern as like a daytime gig. I had a writing gig at night, and then I would write all night till about 5 a.m.
Wow.
Run home, take a shower, grab some coffee, and then go be an intern at Marvel. And then an opportunity came up. Somebody left as an editor, and the seat was still warm, and I sat in it, and then and then got hired. Yeah. And after about 6 months, I knew what the hell I was doing, and then stayed there for about 6 years, editing the all ages lines, Marvel Adventures and The Wizard of Oz, and I worked on Jeff Loeb's Red Hulks, Agents of Atlas with Jeff Parker, MODOK's 11 with Fred Van Lente, just like tons and tons of stuff. And then decided to take off and do my own production company. And I've been lucky enough to work with Dynamite for a really long time, doing all of their Flash Gordon, James Bond, Thundercats, and now like all the Disney stuff as well. So it's just been awesome. And Gargoyles was the first one of those. So
I love that. Yeah. Very cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. I do have one more question for Greg. And then we'll kind of wrap up with maybe a question or two for both of you, if that's okay.
Sure.
The question, I have to go to Greg. When I was looking up some of the stuff you did recently preparing for the interview, I was kind of floored again, on top of already being floored about Gargoyles and everything, that you were instrumental with the Young Justice TV series over at DC. That show, my brother and I discovered that, we're already kind of adults and doing our thing. And, we grew up with the kind of Bruce Timm, Paul Dini era of the DC animated universe that they were doing, like the Justice League and the Batman animated series, Superman, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But I had kind of distanced myself from some of the superhero cartoons for the most part. And then my brother brought to the attention Young Justice. And I was like, okay, I'll check it out. I don't know all these characters. I'm more familiar with Teen Titans. I don't really know Young Justice, but feels like it's striking a similar chord. I was completely blown away by that show. Absolutely loved it. So I guess my question to you, other than thank you with a question mark, is simply, is there anything, any little anecdote or anything you can share about your time with Young Justice? Just to hear you talk about it for a minute, I think would kind of make my whole night.
There are hundreds of things I could share, I guess. I'm trying to think of one thing specifically.
Sure.
I worked a little bit with Brandon Vietti, who was my partner on that show, here and there, but not directly. I wrote some freelance episodes of The Batman that Brandon directed, so I knew him, but we hadn't worked together. And the head at Warner Brothers TV Animation, Sam Register, liked what I had done over at Sony on the Spectacular Spider-Man. And invited me to come over to Warner Brothers and work there, and team me up with Brandon, who had not produced before. First off, Brandon is always the smartest guy in any room, period, just period. But Brandon had been a board artist and a director, but he'd never produced before and he'd never written before. So Sam thought it would be a good idea to team the two of us up, and to team us up with character designer Phil Barassa, who later won an Emmy for his Young Justice character designs. But he didn't put us on Young Justice initially. Initially, he put us on Green Lantern, because there was a big Green Lantern movie coming out starring Ryan Reynolds as Green Lantern. And So they were like very excited to have a cartoon that followed up on that, except you couldn't use Hal Jordan. Well, I mean, like he could guest star, but it couldn't be about Hal Jordan, because Hal Jordan would be in the movies. This would be like something else about the Green Lantern Corps.
Sure.
So Brandon and I were very excited about this idea and developed this whole sort of Black Ops Green Lantern story.
Wow.
And where Hal appears in the pilot to sort of help launch the thing, but then isn't a regular in the series.
Right.
And we got really excited about that. We worked on that for about 3 weeks, and then Sam came back and said, well, they're delaying the movie, so we don't need a Green Lantern show yet. We will eventually, but it's too soon. They've delayed the movie a year, so we need something else. So then he assigned Space Ghost to us.
Whoa.
And we were both huge Space Ghost fans, and we were bringing in the Herculoids and the and all the other sort of Hanna-Barbera action characters.
Yeah.
We were bringing in. We're finding a way to do that. We got very excited about Space Ghost, and they'd done Space Ghost Coast to Coast, but we were going to take it seriously and still have fun with it, but take it seriously. And we worked on that for about 3 weeks, and then Sam came back and said, we're not doing Space Ghost. Consumer Products, isn't interested in Space Ghost, and that's how we pay for the show. So we're not doing Space Ghost.
Yeah.
And so he said, let's do Young Justice. And Brandon and I both said no. We were like, Justice League Unlimited and Teen Titans had both just finished. And we were like, those are they're very different, but they're two great shows. Where do we fit in there? And he said, look, Young Justice is just a cool title. You can base it off the 90s Young Justice comics or not. Do whatever you want with it. Do a show for the entire DC universe. I don't care. Just figure something out. And we were like, we really don't like this idea. And he's like, just think about it for a little bit. So we went away, I'm going to say feeling pretty negative about it, to be honest. And
sure.
Then, Brandon came up with this idea, which, had something to do with what we had developed for Green Lantern Corps, which was, well, what if this is the Justice League's sort of Black Ops team? In other words, Superman, Batman, they have these Flash, Green Lantern, they have these big symbols on their chests, right? Like they're literally, hey, we're the targets. Everyone sees us all the time, but so how do we do things when no one's supposed to know what we're doing?
Yeah.
And so once we sort of decided that this would be a show about teenagers first, spies second, and superheroes a distant third, suddenly that felt like we were in different territory from both Justice League Unlimited and Teen Titans.
100%.
And Teen Titans, which again, I love Teen Titans.
Yeah.
But that was a show where you had the 5 kids in the tower. They didn't seem to have any other lives, any other people in their lives except the 5 of them, Yeah. So we were like, no, we're going to deal with their families. We're going to deal with school. We're going to deal with all the things that teenagers deal with. But on top of that, they're spies. And on top of that, they're superpowered spies. And suddenly that felt interesting to us. And then Phil Barassa started doing some designs for it. And those were fantastic. Wow. And I put together a list of, I don't know, like 75 teenage DC superheroes. And it was quite a list because, DC at the time at least had 4 teenage blonde female archers, because I guess having 3 blonde teenage female archers wasn't enough.
Wasn't quite enough. Yeah.
So we went through all this list and we picked out who's going to be our core team, who's going to come in later, that kind of thing. And we did the same thing on the villain side of things. And we put together the show that became Young Justice.
Wow.
But it started out with us saying absolutely not. That was the sort of our first response was no.
And then that's the one that got all the green lights. And wow.
That went through. Yeah.
Well, I'm really happy you came back to it. That show is absolutely phenomenal. And I thank you very much for sharing the anecdote. To kind of land the plane, because I want to be sensitive to your time, these questions will be for both Greg and Nate. I just want, for anyone watching this, I want people to have an idea. If there's something you have worked on, whether it's TV, whether it's something you've written in comics or something you've edited, something that has your fingerprint on, that you can say, hey, this is something I'm really proud of, that I would encourage anyone who wants to check out more of my stuff to check out X. What would both of you maybe point them to for people in the audience that want to explore more of what you guys have worked on?
Nate?
Greg, you've done so much more, please.
I mean, I'm old, so I've done a lot.
Seasoned.
I'm really proud of what Nate and I have done with Gargoyles over the last 2+ years. I'm really proud. I think that our 12 issues of Gargoyles is really fine. We did 6 issues of Dark Age, as I mentioned that earlier, the Halloween special, now the Winter Special, and 5 issues of Quest. I am thrilled by all of them, and hope people pick that stuff up. I've also been writing the Spectacular Spider-Men, plural, for Marvel recently, and that's been a lot of fun. If you're going back, I've done Young Justice comics. I did Captain Atom all the way back in the 80s.
Whoa!
And in between, I've done all sorts of stuff, including Star Wars Kanan, and other things. I've written novels, a couple of World of Warcraft novels, a couple of Magic the Gathering novels, and a couple of original novels, Reign of the Ghosts and Spirits of Ash and Foam, and I'm really proud of those books. And then, there are TV shows, and the main ones probably are Gargoyles, obviously, The Spectacular Spider-Man, Young Justice. I did a season of Witch. I did a season of Star Wars Rebels. Did a season of Max Steel. I've got a pretty substantial resume because, again, I've just been around a very long time.
Dominic, if you don't mind if I ask Greg a question.
Oh, please. The floor is yours.
Of all of that, and it is deep and it is wide, Greg, what is the best script that you've written, in your opinion? What script did you finish? Like, for example, you just finished it and it's like, I don't think I can write better than that. I put it all out there.
There were 2 scripts I wrote in a row that I was really, really proud of and thought, this is great. And one was Reign of the Ghosts, which was a original pilot, and it didn't go. We sold it at Nick, but it didn't end up going. And so I bought it. I was working for DreamWorks at the time, so DreamWorks owned it. But I had worked for Jeffrey Katzenberg for a decade, 7 years at Disney and nearly 3 years at DreamWorks. And so I went to Jeffrey and I said, hey, I want to turn this into a novel. And so he sold it to me for $1.
Wow.
And so I'm proud of that novel. And that was based on that original hour-long pilot that I was extremely proud of. And then there was another script I wrote that never went, called The Roswell Conspiracies, that I thought was one of the best things I've ever done. I haven't looked at it in, it didn't get made. They ended up making the show with a different set of showrunners. It was one of the many projects I got fired off of over the years. But I thought that my script for the pilot for that was really one of the best things I ever wrote. And it felt slightly better when the guy who replaced me on Roswell later said to me, I don't know why they fired you. That was a great script.
Oh, man.
And so I felt simultaneously really good and really bummed out.
Yeah.
So that never got made, and and they owned it. So, and there was no way they were making the show, so there was no way they were going to sell that one back to me. I didn't try, but
it was like, I got dumped, but the new boyfriend says I'm super cool.
Yeah.
So
exactly. Yeah. So,
man.
Those were the 2, I think, and I wrote them like one almost right after the other. I mean, really,
Wow.
Just flowed.
a
Just
few
like flowed
months.
out of
I was in a zone for a bit there where it just felt like it was really clicking.
Yeah,
That was so long ago that it's sort of sad, because
yeah.
what does that mean about the stuff I do now? But yeah, those are the two that I always felt, and it was interesting because as good as I thought those were, neither of those pilots got made. And on one, at least I got to turn it into a novel, but on the other one, I just flat out got fired. So
Mhm.
I could have been wrong about both of them.
Yeah. So for me, I've edited hundreds and hundreds of comics at this point, and I've written very little. Uh, but what I have written, I would say what I've edited, the things that I truly feel that like don't necessarily have my voice, but definitely have like I I was like the biggest advocate to be able to make them to recognize that like there's something here and I've got to do everything in my power to get this to help unlock the way the different impediments to get this to the public. One is Thor the Mighty Avenger by Roger Langridge and Chris Samnee, Matt Wilson on colors and Wes Wooten lettering. That was just one of the one of the best scripts I ever read, some of the best art I ever oversaw, just 8 issues of perfection. And then to be completely honest, and he is here, so I don't let him know, but the 12 issues of Gargoyles are really special. That Greg and George did was just incredibly special to be a part of, and I'm so lucky to continue to be a part of this stuff. But that's just one of those things where I look back, it's like, wow, like that's a season of Gargoyles that I helped, that I was around when other people did that. How lucky am I? As far as writing, I also have two things that that I one of the reasons I don't write a lot is because I'm busy editing, but another is just because I edit myself as I go, and it's like you don't want me. You don't want my talent as a writer if you have my scrutiny as an editor, because I will rip me apart.
Right.
And rip you apart. And so it's really hard for my brain to release stuff. And there were only 2 times where I really felt like it was good enough to get written. One was this graphic novel I wrote called Cowboy that I co-created with Chris Eliopoulos. It was for Boom. That it was the original public. We have the rights back now, but that was just a really like kind of emotionally autobiographical book about a 10-year-old bounty hunter that is dedicated to rounding up his entire outlaw family. And so I just did that for 90 pages. And then again, to in all honesty, it was this Gargoyle special. It was just so like I will forever be thankful to Greg and to Disney and to Dynamite and everybody who was just like, I just had this simple idea that I just kind of like, it just came out, and George just came to play and really made the thing sing. And I just looked at it, it's like that's exactly what I thought it was going to be, and I'm so glad that we got to make it. So those are the 2 times.
I love to hear that. And honestly, I have more questions. I want to hear more stories, but we're coming up on the hour, and I just want to thank you both for the time. Thank you very, very much, both of you, Greg and Nate, for making this time. Everyone, please go get the Gargoyles Winter Special. If you want it, get it for a stocking stuffer, get it for a loved one. Go check it out. Check out some of their other projects. A huge thank you to everyone at Dynamite as well for setting this up. And everyone, thank you for watching. Thank you for watching my interview today. This has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave this video a like, comment, and maybe check out another video on your way out. Thanks. Have a good one.